A deal is a deal. That's the EU's position in the wake of a ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court, which found that many of Donald Trump's tariffs were illegal. In response, Trump has since announced across-the-board temporary tariffs on all U.S. trading partners, which now stand at 15%. The chair of the European Parliament's Trade Committee has said all of this amounts to tariff chaos and that the new tariffs are a breach of the deal that the EU had already reached with the White House. In fact, a vote in the European Parliament to ratify that deal that was scheduled for tomorrow has been suspended. Luke Schrago has the story.
Now facing a fresh set of 15% US tariffs, Europe wants clarity over the trade deal it struck with Washington last year, which it's now holding off on ratifying.
A deal is a deal. Both sides have agreed to, and indeed have a duty to honour their part of the agreement we made with the US. So now we are simply saying to the US, it's up to you to clearly show to us what path you are taking to honour the agreement.
With the US Supreme Court striking down existing tariffs, the White House pivoted to a global blanket duty of 15% under a different legal framework, one that would come in on top of certain already existing levies and make it more expensive for countries than those that didn't even have trade deals agreed. In the case of the European Union, that could mean up to 17 or 18% on its goods rather than the 15% negotiated. For the US, though, it's just a matter of legal footwork and insisting that tariffs aren't going away. Its trade representative called on nations to stick to the deals they'd made.
We're going to conduct investigations that can allow us to impose tariffs if it's justified by the investigation. So we expect to have continuity in the president's tariff program. We know that these laws work, they're tried and true, and so we'll have continuity. The policy hasn't changed, just the tools have changed.
The new tariffs, however, come with a 150-day time limit built in, with US congressional approval needed to extend them, something Donald Trump declared over social media on Monday that he simply didn't need.
And for more on this story, I'm joined by Guntram Wolff, a senior fellow at Bruegel. Thanks so much for being with us here on France 24. First of all, do you agree with the criticism from the EU that these new tariffs are a breach of the deal the bloc had already reached with the White House? And if so, how should the EU respond?
Well, look, I mean, these new trade deals, these new tariffs create a lot of uncertainty for European exporters, for the European economy. I mean, let's remember that the deal before was a pretty long-lasting deal. The idea was that this would last until the end, at least, of the Trump presidency. Now we are in on a different legal basis with a deal that will be probably only 150 days of tariffs. Then Congress has to approve it under this legal base. So this creates uncertainty. And of course, from the perspective of a US consumer, they will say, okay, wait a minute. If in 150 days these tariffs won't exist anymore, then I will postpone buying my next big car from Europe because then I might have better terms. So I think in the short term, this is economically a net negative, but politically, let me stress that, it's of course a big positive because it shows that US Supreme Court is actually imposing checks and balances on this US president. And that is very, very important for Europe as well.
As you're pointing out here, Trump is using a trade law from 1974 that allows him to impose these tariffs for just 150 days before they need to be approved by Congress. So there is a scenario in which these tariffs go away in just 5 months, given that the midterms are coming up. Does that at all change the calculation for the EU?
Yeah, I mean, it does, because if you are an exporter, I mean, you want clarity, you want to know how the tariffs will look like in 150 days. And now there is this massive uncertainty whether he will bring this to Congress, US Congress or not. And if he does bring it to US Congress, will US Congress actually be ready to impose this heavy tax on US consumers or not? And so my expectation is that in the short term, actually, it will have negative effects on European exports to the US because US consumers will try to postpone some of their consumption decisions until they have clarity on this tariff. And let me really point out one more important issue. I mean, what really happens here is that the legal base for the US president to just at will tax foreign exporters has really been put into question, which I think is good, but which at the same time raises lots of questions about US debt sustainability. I mean, let's be clear, US Congress will find it extremely difficult to agree on taxes, will find it extremely difficult to agree on new tariffs. And so at the end of the day, the high deficits might simply be very difficult to fund here. And so yes, then this has implications not just for trade, but also for the stability and the creditworthiness of the US debt and the US government.
I'm reminded that late last year, Trump slapped a 39% tariff on Switzerland because the president of Switzerland had, quote, rubbed him the wrong way. It seems he won't have the ability to do that going forward. So given that Trump has been stripped of his power to impose tariffs on these individual countries, does that put the EU in a greater position of power? Does the EU now have leverage that it didn't have before?
Yes, I think politically Europe has gained from this. The US Supreme Court has limited the powers of the president, and that is positive because it has really limited the capacity of the US president to just arbitrarily at his own will identify individual countries and exercise massive political power on these individual small countries. So yes, that has strengthened the EU's position as a trade negotiation bloc, and I think the EU should be wise in using it. We don't want to escalate, but certainly we need clarity on the tariffs going forward.
You look at a country like China, which did not really appease Trump through all of this in negotiations when he was threatening tariffs of 125%. And now, like every other country, they're facing a 15% tariff on exports to the U.S. So what's the lesson here dealing with Trump, that appeasement is not the right strategy, do you think?
Well, I'm careful with that. I mean, first of all, we did do some appeasement, if you wish, in the Scotland deal with the US because of the very strong security vulnerability that we've certainly still had last year when it comes to Ukraine and the US support for Ukraine. And so you didn't want to risk that. And let me also highlight that the Chinese strategy, even though it was a strategy of strength, also in the end did not deliver lower tariffs. I mean, China did pay higher tariffs in the end than the EU paid towards the US. And so now actually the deal, the Supreme Court now has actually led to lower tariffs for Chinese exporters to the US. So in that sense, I think China is actually also benefiting from the decision of the Supreme Court here. And no, I don't think I would immediately say appeasement has been the wrong strategy. It was a moment of difficult compromises because of the difficult security situation in Europe.
So contrary to what Trump claims, at least 90% of these tariffs have been paid for by American consumers and U.S. companies, and foreign exporters have absorbed a much smaller portion of the costs. That said, how do trading partners go about getting back the money that they've lost? Is there any recourse, or is this just more uncertainty?
Well, I think this is still very unclear. The chair of the European Trade Committee has said that European exporters can claim some money back, but I frankly think this is going to be an extremely difficult legal process. There will be lots of litigation in US courts by US companies, by US consumers. We have seen some US governors from US states already asking money to be paid back to their own citizens. So this has created a lot of legal claims on the US government. And I mean, frankly speaking, I wouldn't bet a lot of money on trying to get back some of these tariffs. I think these tariffs that have been paid, they are basically have been paid, and it will take years and years to get things back. The most important thing is to get really some stability, forward-looking stability into this trade relation with the US, which is very important for European exporters, but it's also very important, of course, for US consumers. And at the end of the day, the US trade policy has to return to some stability. Otherwise, it's bad for the US economy and it's bad for the world economy.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Guntram Wolff, a senior fellow at Bruegel. Thanks so much for joining us here on France 24.
Thank you.